Okay, what I'm going to try and do here is go through this sequence from Romeo and Juliet and really just stop and pause and make notes and go through all of the different techniques that are used and the kind of the purpose of them. I'll try and use as much film language as possible. I think really for between now and your exam on Wednesday, what you need more than anything is a sense of how to apply the language at the right time when you're writing about film extracts. And really sort of understand why a director uses them. I've chosen this sequence from about halfway through Romeo and Juliet, and it's the sequence just after Romeo and Juliet have got married, and it's the sequence that leads up to Tybalt's throwing down the gauntlet and wishing to duel with Romeo, and then finally at the end Mercutio's death, and then Romeo finally killing Tybalt. I'm not going to show the whole sequence because it's quite long, and I'm going to be pausing quite a lot as I analyse this. So I'll just turn the sound up so we can really hear it quite well. So I'm going to start with this first shot here, and this is literally just after Romeo and Juliet have been married. And so what we have here is we have what we call an establishing shot. And the establishing shot, as you know, is the long shot, or usually an extreme long shot, or ELS, and it sets the scene. And so, and if we look at the way in which the shot is constructed, we have Benvolio here on the third intersection on the right hand side, and we have Mercutio right in the middle, and having Mercutio in the middle creates a slight sense of imbalance. So when you look at positioning, when you look at the way in which the scene is constructed, the intersection of thirds, or the golden rule, is the position in the frame which creates balance. It's the most pleasing to the eye. And actually, if you see someone in the middle of the frame, that's a deliberate technique that the director uses to create a slight sense of imbalance and unease. So even from before this scene starts, when we have Mercutio here firing into the water, it immediately imbalances us. Look also at the colour. It's set on a very hot day. It's supposed to be hot. It's supposed to be unsettling, and even we know that there's thunder. So I'll just start playing this, and then I'll talk and pause as we're going. So we see it going up, and even there, look. If I just go back a tiny bit. Oops, sorry. This is the problem with this. There we are. If we look at what's happened is the camera's tilted upwards. Tilts. And the camera tilting upwards, what it does is it places the horizon in the centre of the frame, and that again is imbalanced, because now what we've done is we've moved into a very imbalanced looking shot. So right from the very beginning of the scene, Baz Luhrmann is trying to create a sense of imbalance and tension and sort of anxiety. The colours are unnatural, the framing's unnatural. So even before we begin the scene itself, both the mise en scène, the use of colour, the use of positioning in the frame, all of these add up to a rather imbalanced and slightly uneasy looking scene. Let's carry it on. So we move into this second scene here, and we have this slightly longer depth of field. Remember, depth of field is quite a useful one for you to just go on to the next page here. Look at depth of field. Depth of field is whether you can see whether the background's very blurred or it's in focus. And here we've got it slightly blurred. So the depth of field is reasonably long, but we're still foregrounding Mercutio. So when you analyse a sequence, look for whether the background is in focus or not, and why that might be. Continually ask yourself why. Okay, this is really important. It's the same in English. I mean, actually analysing a poem and analysing a sequence from a film are very, very similar. Why does the director make the decisions that he or she makes when they construct a scene? What is the reason for it? And we see here, we see Benvolio in the background, but Mercutio is still very much foregrounded. He's very much the centre of this scene. And again, look at him central here. Look at the fact that he's in the middle of the frame. Again, it's suggesting there's a sense, A, that he's the most important character in this sequence, but also imbalances the frame right from the very, very start. So again, it's adding to this feeling of tension. And as a viewer, we wouldn't really even notice this. It's not something that we would particularly notice. But this is a conscious decision that Baz Luhrmann has made to give us a slightly uneasy sensation.
Let's retire. The day is hot. The capitals are abroad.
And then we have here, you know, that we've got Benvolio clearly anxious. And what Luhrmann has done here, he's gone into an extreme close-up of Benvolio. And that's there to emphasise what he says and emphasise his concern. So again, when you look at close-ups, ask yourself, why is the director doing it? In this case, he's doing it to suggest a sense of anxiety. He's placed Benvolio slightly off-centre, and I think the reason he's done this is to show that Benvolio in some respects is a stabilising influence. He doesn't place him very completely centrally, he places them slightly left of centre, just to show that sense that Benvolio wants balance, wants equilibrium, whereas Mercutio is anything but someone who wants balance and equilibrium. He wants things to be tension. He thrives on tension and anxiety, which I think is why Luhrmann places him in the middle of the frame at the beginning of the scene. There we are. So that's that real sense of anxiety, but the balance. And then we move into this very lively next section. If you like, you can break this into sections, and in your exam, if you have a sequence of sort of a few minutes, often it helps. My suggestion would be to break it into sections, because you'll probably find that you'll be writing a paragraph per section. Again, I always think poetry and film are very, very similar, because you have sequences in a film or scenes. You also have like stanzas in a poem that can be linked together. There's a sense that the poet is making absolute decisions about line length, about repetition, about sound, and in some respects that the filmmaker, the director, is doing similar things. So we go into this next section here, and this section uses lots of handheld camera. Oh, gone into purple there, that's nice, inadvertently. So section 2 here uses a lot of handheld camera, and this adds energy. And nearly always when you have handheld camera, it's adding energy and it's adding realism. The sort of slightly jerky nature of almost like a documentary style. So if you watch this, lots of short editing, look at the cuts, look at the length of each shot, and look also at the framing, whether they're using close-ups, lots of medium close-ups here, which gives you it gives you the character, Mercutio, but also the people around him. So there's a sense of it being very social and lots of energy. Look at the difference between that first section with 2 or 3 long shots in terms of the length of time, the duration, and now we move into a much more lively, energetic scene. But also look at the way in which the tension is built up. We'll see that with the jerky cinematography and the slight sense of anxiety in the characters. Look also at the mise en scène. Look at the use of colour. The colour is it's very unusual. Luhrmann has used a particular film stock here, a particular type of film, which emphasises the sort of the browns and sepias, and it gives you that slight cloying, slightly claustrophobic feel. The colour is slightly unnatural in this sequence, as it is in that first sequence at the petrol station. I think he uses exactly the same type of film here. And this is a deliberate decision he's made to make you feel uneasy. And it's a very effective piece of filmmaking. So look, notice you've got, when you see Mercutio, it's jerky and it's juddery and it's moving, and then when it moves, you notice the difference there. When it moves to his friends, the camera stops moving. So it's as if the camera itself is kind of running to keep up with him. There you go, lots of movement. Now watch what happens here. Now we move into the next sequence. If you like, we can call this the third sequence. And the third sequence is Tybalt's arrival. And watch what changes. And if we just move, if we just listen, what we've had until this point, if I just move back actually, what we've had is we've had the sound here in the previous sequence, the sequence we've just seen, is... Sorry, I just had to pause the recording there. The sound in this sequence, before the sequence we've just seen, sequence 2, the sound is diegetic. Remember, diegetic sound means sound inside the scene. Okay, so with diegesis it just means world. So if it's like a radio playing, or it's someone singing, or whatever, then that's called diegetic sound. And we've got so we've had the previous sequence with Mercutio and his friends talking and drawing the guns. It sounds like there's a radio on the beach, or maybe some music playing on a cassette player or whatever. Show my age, cassette player. iPod, okay. And so now what happens is it slightly changes. Listen. Okay. So what we have now is we have a movement in this third sequence to non-diegetic sound, and that's the soundtrack. It's just another name for soundtrack, and that the obvious reason it's there is to build tension. But also it links to the genre. And remember, with Romeo and Juliet borrows from several genres, and the genre, of course, is the Western. And this sequence is quite heavily influenced by the Western genre. Baz Luhrmann is what we call quite a postmodern director. And postmodernism, one of the things that postmodernism does is it deliberately borrows from other genres. Another really good example of a postmodern director would be Quentin Tarantino. Quentin Tarantino, in so many of his films, borrows deliberately from other genres. Okay, we've got Romeo and Juliet, which is essentially a tragic love story. But Luhrmann has borrowed some of the style of the genre, of the Western genre, and brought it in. And the music, if you listen to the music has that kind of slight spaghetti Western feel to it. There we are. So it's that kind of twanging guitar, which is the sort of gunfight feeling to it. And then we've got the position. Look again at the position. Remember what I was saying a moment ago about Mercutio being in the centre of the frame, and how the person in the centre, A, is the most important, but B, it creates that slightly imbalanced sense, as if the person in the middle represents imbalance. And it's the same with Tybalt. Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet is absolutely the imbalancing character. He is the character that causes the problems. He's the character that causes the issues between Romeo and Juliet, because he eventually is killed, and that leads to Romeo's banishment to Mantua, which leads to Juliet's fake death, blah, 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 when he comes back. You know the story. You've probably seen this film to death. You're probably sick to death of it. You probably never, ever want to watch it again. And I don't blame you. Great film, but like any film, you can get really bored if you watch it too many times. So we've got Tybalt masked by his two henchmen, and him in the middle here. That's really suggesting him being both the most important and also being imbalanced. But we've got also the mise en scène. Look at this posture here. Look at the way in which he's holding himself. Very reminiscent of the Western, and the sort of the swagger of the gunslinger. There we are. So, and then we've got this sequence here of a series of close-ups. And we have Benvolio here, and what we call this a reaction shot. Again, I'm sure none of what I'm saying here is unexpected to you, or is kind of new to you. I'm sure you've done all this before. And this reaction shots are always in close up. They're nearly always with a narrow depth of field. In other words, it's blurred in the background. You'll see quite a lot of these in the sequence. And often look at Benvolio. Once again, he is off-centre and that once again suggests that Benvolio is not either the active presence in the scene, nor is he the disruptive presence, that Benvolio represents that balancing influence in the scene. And in order to get an A and an A star here, that's the kind of thing you need to be looking at. Look at the position of the character in the scene. If it looks normal to you, like this one does, it's because he's using the rule of thirds. He's placing Benvolio here on the third intersection. You know, you divide a frame into three here, we place Benvolio in this third, then he looks more imbalanced. If he was placed right in the centre, it would look more imbalanced. Again, it's a decision that Baz Luhrmann has made deliberately to make Benvolio seem like he's not the antagonist, that he's the bystander, but he's also the one that wants to bring order. Again, look, he's in the middle, bang in the middle, disruptive. Okay, so we've got, again, he's almost as if he's gone the other way now, and he's pushed him away from the third. Again, it's something imbalanced about that shot. Interesting now, he's just started to move him to the centre. He's looking a little bit uneasy. And that's a great shot. That's such an iconic shot. Look at the position here. You've got a very low camera angle. And the low camera angle, of course, often represents, if the camera's looking up, it can often represent dominance. Here, it actually is simply linking into the genre, the Western genre. That's a very, very typical shot from what we call a spaghetti western, where we get a shot from the feet of the gunslinger to the person that he's looking at. Okay, and that to me is a very iconographic, or iconic rather, a very iconic shot linking into the Western genre.
Oh! And but one word with one of us. Couple something. Make it a word and a blow.
So we've got these reaction shots again. So we've had Mercutio being part of the action, and then we get reaction shots. And the reaction shots are very, very important because, if you like, they're telling the audience how they should think. So what a reaction shot does is it indicates to the audience how they should be feeling. And interestingly, the use of sound and use of non-diegetic sound. So, you know, as an audience, we're often being given cues, we're often being given hints about how to feel, how to think, how to act, what emotions to go through. The use of reaction shots are part of that whole package. The non-diegetic sound as well. Non-diegetic sound, very, very important. When I talk about non-diegetic sound, I mean, as obviously soundtrack. It's very important because it's there to kind of help the audience understand the scene and understand the emotions. And it's actually, as much as anything, to help the audience to understand the character's emotions. Remember, in a novel, we can actually get a sense of how the characters are feeling because the writer can tell us, but you can't get inside a character in a film. So what the soundtrack does is it helps us to understand how the characters are feeling. And in this sense, we're getting that very uneasy, very tense music because this is how the characters are feeling. All of them, including Mercutio, they're all feeling wound up. Mercutio's using humour in order to deflect how he's feeling, but they're all angry, they're all wound up, and they know, as Benvolio said at the beginning, you know, if they don't, you know, move away from each other, then there is going to be a fight, there is going to be a brawl.
You shall find me apt enough to that, sir, and you will give me occasion. Could you not take some occasion? Well, now give it!
So we've got that low camera angle, and the other thing to say about the low camera angle, it often emphasises superiority. I'll just put CA for camera angle. That the low camera angle is quite useful because it emphasises a character's attitude. Oh dear, sorry, terrible writing. I apologise. Superiority. You know, if you have a low camera angle, a camera looking up at a character, what it tends to do is it emphasises his size and it makes him seem larger. Whereas if you've got a high camera angle looking down on a character, it can actually make foreshorten him and make him look shorter. So the low camera angle is emphasising Mercutio's power, his control, his confidence, and his sort of, how he's feeling, how he's trying to act in front of Tybalt. And then we've got these again as the sequence of reaction shots that Tybalt's showing. Now watch what happens here. Okay, so we've lost the non-diegetic sound for that next bit, but then watch what happens. Tybalt's just pushed Mercutio's button. We know how Mercutio feels about Tybalt. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from this medium shot, or medium long shot, I suppose it is actually, of Mercutio surrounded by his friends, and then we get a very different feeling to the next sequence. There, and it starts. The next sequence starts with an extreme close-up. So if we so we've got this ECU of Mercutio. And this extreme close-up is really emphasising his reaction. And what it does to the audience is it makes us hold our breath. This is a pause, if you like. It's a bit like a colon or a dash in a poem. Excuse me. You've got a kind of a medium long shot, and then all of a sudden we've got this pause and a collective holding of the breath. And then he's off. See, you notice how we've lost any non-diegetic sound. We've only got the diegetic sound of the C in the background, and he repeats that word, and it's like a pause before the action starts. It's very, very clever filmmaking. Pause, and then it changes. And then look at the way in which at this stage we've got. We've got lots of, we move into a much sort of shorter cuts, and the shorter cuts between shots emphasises action and energy. So when you analyse the sequence in your exam, look at the space, the timing between the duration, what we call shot duration. Look at the shot duration. Look at the way in which it cuts from one to the other. Look at whether it's slow or fast, because that very much suggests a speeding up or a slowing down. Again, I like to think of it, if you think about poetry, that in some sections in poetry the punctuation speeds up how you read it and sometimes slows it down. And it's the same thing here. It's almost like you can think about the cuts between shots as a form of punctuation. Lots of handheld cameras. Again, look at the slightly sort of uneven, jerky film cinematography. Lots, and then what we've got here is we've got a point of view shot. Look at this, is quite interesting, and this is again a very modern, quite postmodern film technique. We've got point of view or POV shots, and the POV shot is with Tybalt looking into the camera, and of course he's looking at Mercutio. And the point of view shot will places us in Mercutio's Mercutio's point of view, which enables us to kind of be more on his side, that we get that sense of the aggression that Tybalt's showing towards him. There. Interesting that we don't get point of view shots, we don't get Mercutio looking at the camera, we get Tybalt looking at the camera, and that's placing us in Mercutio's point of view. Now then, we've got a... Oops. Sorry, I'm going to have to go back a tiny bit. Can I do that with this? No, that's annoying. Sorry, this is going to be really annoying because I'm just going to try very, very good. Tiny bit's really hard to do. Let's just watch this bit again, just to back up, because it's only about 30 seconds long. And then I'll pause at that last shot. Listen to the non-diegetic sound starts up again. That's the soundtrack. Again, it's emphasising tension, emphasising anxiety, emphasising drama. And then we've got this very narrow depth of field. What Luhrmann has done is he's thrown the background completely out of focus, And the reason he does this is to suddenly make it realise that the only two people who are important are Tybalt and Mercutio. Like everyone else has disappeared. Let's call them T and M. That everyone else has disappeared, and look what happened to it. So there, and you can see very, very blurred background, and that's really emphasising all of a sudden it's become much more serious, and the two of them are prepared to do battle. And then it's this next shot that I want to just pause on. I'm trying to do it properly this time. There. Okay, that is another classic Western shot. All of the iconography is of the Western. Iconography is an element of mise en scène. And it just means that it's the things that we see which are very much linking into the genre, and of course it's the Western. So this is using Western iconography. It's using the blowing wind. It's using the look at the position of the arms, the camera angle, the low camera angle. That's so classically Western. The gun here in the foreground. The characters sort of to the side, the sidesmen, if you like, the people to the side. But what's really clever, of course, is then we get Romeo turning up here in the background. And so what will happen in this next sequence is that, again, the scene changes very, very quickly. Look at the sun. Also, sorry, yeah, the sun. That's very iconographic, or iconographic. This is the sun's very iconic as well. The setting sun, again, very, very much linking into the Western genre.
Peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man.
Now listen to the sound again. Listen to the non-diegetic sound here. It's this build-up. And again, it's like you can often compare sound in film to your own emotion, and it sounds like a drawing of breath, like a breathing in, and it's breathing in because we're waiting for the next thing to happen, because we know what's going to happen. We know how Tybalt feels, so we know what's going to happen next. Now, what we've got is what we call a motif here, okay, and that's a recurring image or sound. And we've got there's much softer sound, although it's slightly in a minor key, of Romeo. So Romeo's arrived, and all of a sudden the sounds change, but there's a tension underneath it. We've heard a very similar type of sound attributed to Romeo before, but now this time there's a slight edge to it.
The love I bear thee can afford no better term than this.
And again, we've got we've got the very, very shallow depth of field, again linking to the fact now it's only Romeo and Tybalt who are important, no one else is important. Look at the way also, remember with mise en scène, you also look at lighting, and look at the backlighting of Romeo. It's called a halo effect. Again, that's done deliberately. Luhrmann has deliberately placed DiCaprio with the sun behind him, because what it does is it softens his features and it gives him that slightly angelic halo. All of these are deliberate techniques that Luhrmann has used.
Thou art a villain.
And look at this next sequence. He's using a slight jerkiness, which we saw, if you remember, right at the beginning of the film at the petrol station. We have a very similar. I'm not sure how he does this. I think he must just slow the film down and then maybe miss a few frames out, because we get a slight jerkiness, and it's a very stylized form of cinematography. Not sure why he does it. Maybe it's just to emphasize the gun. Look, it's slightly jerky and slow. And we've got this great shot here. It's just fantastic, with this chap with his dodgy teeth and the gun. And again, he's slightly blurred so that we're seeing the bullets being removed. The sound also here is to build tension, and it's almost as if the sound is saying it's reached the point of no return. One of us is going to die, and it's just a kind of a slow and gradual build-up. And again, Mercutio doing the same thing. Lots of shortcuts here. Look at the way in which it's cross-cutting. Another technique which you must kind of understand and use is the cross-cutting, and that's just cutting from one character or scene to another. So the cross-cut between Romeo and Tybalt, that sort of back and forth, suggesting that kind of gradually that they're going to get closer together and they're getting closer to battle. And again, this cross-cutting between the two of them, they get closer together. And listen to the sound now. When Romeo looks up, all of a sudden the emotion and changes in the scene, and we get a much softer sound there.
Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the opportunity.
Look how much slower it is now. The shot duration is longer. The sound is quieter.
Therefore, farewell. I see thou knowest
Now,
me not.
look what happens now. The sound builds up, and the next sequence, what happens? There's that building up of tension.
For you shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me.
Builds up again. Look at the shot duration, speeds up.
Turn and draw. Turn and draw.
Now we've got exactly. Look again. We've got Romeo's point of view at this stage, and again we're being placed in Romeo's shoes. We're being made to feel how Romeo feels here.
Draw, lest I never injure thee.
And you might think this is point of view, but it's not. DiCaprio's looking up, and what we've got here is we've got the opposite to what we've had before in the high camera angle, and that emphasises his vulnerability, Romeo's vulnerability. And then we can counter that. We can counter that with the low angle shot of Tybalt there.
Love thee better than thou canst devise.
Now, interestingly, we're still keeping with Mercutio here. We're getting shots of Mercutio, and of course the reason is we need to see how Mercutio feels, because it's very soon Mercutio will intercede. This scene, in many respects, is not really about Romeo and Tybalt. It's about Romeo and Mercutio. So we need to keep these shots of Mercutio in order to understand that.
So thou shalt know the reason of my love, and so do Capulet, whose name I tender as dearly as mine own.
And listen to the use of diegetic sound. If you notice the diegetic sound of the thunder as well, that sort of adds to the uneasiness and the tension. The building storm, the gathering storm. Look, again, and the use of mise en scène here is quite interesting. That they're at an old abandoned theatre on the beach, and it's almost as if the scene itself is framed like a play. It's a very clever use of the mise en scène. It's the very interesting use of the background, and it's kind of framing them almost as if they're on stage. Again, looking at mise en scène, looking at the blood around his mouth. Look at what's happened to his hair, and he's all muddy or mucky with sand on his face. That mise en scène suggesting how he's feeling.
Be satisfied.
So now we've got the Mercutio wanting to wade in. Lots of close-ups of Mercutio. Right, now we're moving into the next sequence now, and it's much more the kind of what we call a typical action sequence. And this is Lorman, the typical fight scene, the fight scene that you would get in any kind of action movie. And this again is Lorman borrowing from the tradition of the action movie. Very, very typical use of camera shots, very typical use of the over the shoulder shot there that we see. And again, look, we've got this quite clever, again, very postmodern because it's a deliberate borrowing of the theatre tradition. We've got the typical proscenium stage here. The proscenium is the arch over the top of the stage that kind of frames, if you like, the proscenium frames the stage. And so we've almost got this sort of staged theatre fight scene. Interestingly, now we're getting Tybalt's perspective. So maybe suggesting that Tybalt is, at this moment, the more vulnerable one. There. Interesting. And look how essential Mercutio is again. So often Luhrmann places Mercutio right in the middle of the frame. And again, it's deliberate. Again, typical, and there's nothing particularly interesting or unusual about this sequence here. It's just a fairly generic fight scene. But then, of course, it changes when Tybalt gets stabbed. Now look, we've got this movement here. Now this sudden change to slow motion. And that's so that we know it emphasises the importance of this moment. So if you like, it draws out the... when you see slow motion in films, it's often to draw out importance, to draw out the drama of the scene, and basically what the director's saying, I'm going to slow this bit down because it's important you see what happens. Lots of handheld jerky, handheld shots, moving to slow motion, very stylistic, blur, lots of blur there. It's all very edgy and very difficult to kind of follow. And then it's interesting because look, the wind's picking up, so the mise en scène is very much linking to how everyone's feeling. It's built up and built up and built up, and the storm is approaching. Really interesting shot there. Looks like he's about to take a bow. Looks like this is his audience. Remember the first time we see Mercutio in this film, he is very much the performer. He turns up in his red sports car, he's wearing a short skirt, and here it's almost as if he's taking his final bow on stage. And look at the way in which his audience are grouped around him. Lots of reaction shots, because we're wanting to see how all the characters are feeling about the fact that Mercutio is injured. Now that's quite interesting because this is an interesting technique, because we as the audience, we've been given privileged information. We see before anyone that he knows how serious it is. So the audience learn before the characters of Mercutio's fate. He knows he's very seriously ill, so it's as if we become the privileged party, the privileged group of people who get to know before anyone else that Mercutio is about to die. Now we've got we've got another motif, another recurring sound, another recurring part of the soundtrack that we've heard before. We've heard this earlier on in the film, and this is the kind of Montague and Capulet. In fact, I think, if I remember rightly, it's the first part of the soundtrack we hear when the Montagues and the Capulets are fighting right at the beginning of the film. So this motif is bringing the whole idea of Montagues and the Capulets back together again, the two families who are at war with one another. Interesting use of... very, very interesting, again, the mise en scène, the dark cloud, the storm approaching, the kind of... He's using quite what we call a high dynamic range here. Don't worry too much about this. And what that means is that we get lots of shadow and light and it's almost moving to what we call a chiaroscuro effect. Lots of light. Chiaroscuro, I'm sure you'll have heard before. It just means light and shade. The shadow here, the darkness and the shadow is emphasising the light. So there's lots of contrast between light and shade. It's a low key technique. I mean, the other term we often use is low key lighting. But there's that very kind of edgy. There we are. That very edgy, low key chiaroscuro effect, which suggests that the storm is approaching. That things are only going to get worse. Interesting that there's l'amour, love. That love is the thing that's caused these problems. Very, very off-center camera. We don't see the ground. We only see the top here. All very kind of uneven and again very edgy. And there's those kind of jerky camera shots. There it is. There's that soundtrack that we heard at the beginning of the film. Lots of jerky shots, lots of short cuts, lots of narrow depth of field. Again, placed in the centre there. Although interestingly now, if you notice that last shot, that Tybalt wasn't in the centre, and that shows that he's no longer that antagonistic force. That's interesting. That shot there, look, very. That's what we call a kind of a typical romance shot, with the couple looking into each other's eyes, and that emphasises. Remember, very beginning, there's that sense of this sort of homosexual undertones that Tybalt shows. Mercutio shows. I mean, it's debatable whether that was the case in at the time of Romeo and that Shakespeare was writing, but maybe he did want him to have that sense. But Lorman very much emphasises the attraction that Mercutio feels to Romeo. And it's almost like a sexual attraction that he feels towards him. And that shot there is quite a romantic shot. It's backlit. You see that the lighting is behind. We're getting, again, that halo effect, what we call rim lighting. And that's quite a romantic lighting. And so that shot there is typically romantic, but of course with the blood and everything, it's anything but. So it's kind of an interesting contrast. Actually, a useful term, if you haven't come across it before, is contrapuntal. You might have to go through this recording more than once because I know I'm throwing lots of stuff at you, and that means contrasting. So if you have a contrapuntal image, it's the image that's set up is in counterpoint or in contrast to the look. Yeah, so this is a very iconically romantic camera shot, and yet he's covered in blood. Another thing that you can use is contrapuntal sound, where the image and the what you hear and what you see are at odds with one another. So if you've got a murder scene with happy music, that's what we would call contrapuntal music. But we could call this a contrapuntal camera shot because the romantic image is at odds with how they look and the fact he's dying, which is not very romantic, really. It looks like they're about to kiss. And now what we've done, we're now at the end of the scene. We move back into extreme long shots, and that's signifying to us that the scene is about to end. It's as if the camera draws away. At the beginning, we had the almost identical shot. Obviously, it was nearer the sea, but in terms of camera length, it was almost identical. But again, look, it's really interesting because it's almost as if the curtain's about to close on this act. But look, the seats are all disrupted. Everything. There's so much disruption in that shot. There's so much disorder and anarchy. And right in the middle is the scene of Mercutio's death. And interesting the use of the choir there as well. The sort of angelic choir, and that I think links into the Catholic, the religious iconography of the film. End of scene. You can see him walking away. And look at the way in which when they walk away they leave Mercutio here. So Mercutio at the beginning of the scene is very much the centre of attention, very much the centre of the scene, and he's at the end of the scene as well. They walk away from him, but Luhrmann keeps Mercutio there in the foreground, at the body of Mercutio. Very, very interesting the way he's still important even when he's dead. And that drumming sound, sort of almost like a death knell. Because we know what's going to happen next. We know where Romeo's going, and we know what he's going to do. And there we are, the final shot. So just to go back through some of the sort of the ideas and techniques that I've been indicating to you. If I just go back, can I not just go all the way back here? That's annoying. That when you're looking at a scene, hang on, let's see if I can do it like this. Yeah, there we are. No, that's not worked. When you're looking at a scene, you need to be looking at both what you see and the effect it has on the audience, and continually ask yourself the question as to why the filmmaker has done what they've done. Why have they made the decision to place the person there? Why have they made the decision to use a shallow depth of field with blurred background, or a much wider or deeper depth of field with a foreground, a background in focus? Oh, hang on, that's why that's a different. That's something else I did. Different lesson I was doing. There we are. That's the one. So yeah, always ask yourself this question: why? It's like with poetry, exactly the same with poetry. Why did the poet decide to put a semicolon there and not a full stop? Why did he decide to start a new stanza? So on and so forth. Why did the director decide to have short camera shots here? Why did he decide to have longer ones? Why did he decide on a low angle or high angle? So look at these things. Look at the use of close-ups and long shots and why they're used. The use of handheld camera, why is that used? The use of diegetic sound, remember diegetic being sound in the scene, or non-diegetic sound, which is outside the scene, which is the soundtrack. Look at the genre, look at the things that link into the genre. It's the iconography that you want to look for. The icons, the things that make the genre up, the props, the position of the bodies, the music, all of that's iconic. Look at the use of action and reaction shots. Why do you have the reaction shots when you do the use of low and high camera angle? How the film instructs you how to feel, because the filmmaker is trying to make you, the audience, feel a certain way at a certain time. So continually ask yourself, pause the film and think, how am I supposed to feel at this moment? And what does the filmmaker do to make me feel like this? It's quite a good way to remember it. Again, using high and low camera angle and how that indicates dominance. That's dominance and that's inferiority, because they look bigger when you look up at someone and smaller when you look down on someone. Again, it's the cuts, the energy and the action of the shorter cuts versus the slowing down of longer cuts. Look at use of point of view. Are there times where it looks like the actor's looking at the camera, and the actor's looking at the camera because you're placed at the point of view of the other actor? Look at the way in which depth of field can isolate a character from the background. Again, the use of motifs that I talked about. Motifs of recurring sounds, recurring images, things that we see throughout the film. Very good if you can talk about motifs, because what you're then doing is talking about other parts of the movie. Cross-cutting, cutting from either one scene or one character to the next and back again, and the way in which the closer they get together, the closer it seems that the characters are moving or the scenes are moving together. Again, looking at diegetic sound. Look at the use of typical sequences as well. There are some typical sequences in Romeo and Juliet. And then finally, looking at things like chiaroscuro lighting. That's low key. Chiaroscuro, another term, is low key, and the opposite, of course, is high key. Most of this scene is shot in very high key very bright sunshine, but as soon as the clouds move in, it becomes much more low-key. And then the last thing that I talked about there is the sort of contrast or counterpoint. You can use the word contrast, but if you want to use the word counterpoint instead, that's just a slightly more advanced term. It means the same thing. We have contrapuntal, we have counterpoint in choirs. If any of you have ever sung in a choir, often you'll have a certain, usually the soprano sings counterpoint, and it's a different tune over the top of the one that you're singing. And so here we have we often have, we had an image of the romantic image in counterpoint to the fact that they were all covered in blood and generally not looking very happy. So those are quite a few techniques, lots to get your head around. My suggestion would be to choose another sequence from the film and do the same thing. Watch it, and as you watch it, pause and just make notes. Continually check in with yourself and think, okay, how is the director wanting me to feel? How are they wanting me to think? Are they wanting me to side more with one character than the other? Are they wanting me to feel a certain way about what's going to happen next? How are they creating tension? And so on and so forth. Okay?